fires were still burning long after the plane came down in a wood just beyond the airport runway. A police helicopter was among the first of the emergency services on the scene, searching in vain for survivors. The wreckage was scattered over a wide area, and firefighters had to deal with several ground fires. The plane, which had just taken off, was fully loaded, and the air around the crash scene was thick with the smell of burning aviation fuel. Police say they're also concerned about the plane's cargo.
But there is a suggestion that this may be possibly paint or possibly flammable cargo, so clearly there's also a public safety issue here in terms of perhaps the fire and perhaps chemicals.
Eyewitnesses described it as a huge fireball.
We all rushed outside, saw this glow, colossal glow in the sky, and in fact felt the heat from the burning aircraft a quarter of a mile away from us.
All I saw from the motorway was a column of orange flame leaping straight up into the air. It must have been a fairly hard hit, yeah.
It's thought the plane hit a power line as it ploughed into the wood, leaving a number of homes in the area without electricity. Stansted's runway has been closed all evening, with thousands of passengers stranded as flights are diverted to other airports. This family were on the plane behind the Korean aircraft, waiting their turn to take off.
Everyone on the right-hand side of the plane just looked, and the left-hand side of the plane, and a fireball just went up. Right, and that's all we could really see, and then like all the fire engines and stuff.
The airport runway is expected to remain closed for some time yet. Meanwhile, air accident investigators are already examining the wreckage as they begin their effort to find out what caused this crash. Harry Smith, ITN, Stansted Airport.
We've seen from previous accidents that the problems on takeoff usually come from crew management, that somebody retracts the flaps or the slats too quickly, or they don't put the right power settings in, and that there's a problem on the flight deck rather than a problem with the aircraft, say, or with the weather. And I think that's where we should be looking in this case.
Until last night, this was woodland, Beggars Hill Farm, a mile or so from the end of the Stansted runway. The Korean 747 hasn't just crashed, it's been obliterated. Some of the debris still smouldered this afternoon after the fireball created by 30 tons of exploding kerosene. At the point of impact, an engine lies embedded in the Essex clay. Close by, another fragment of engine at the lip of the crater caused by the fuselage. One body has been recovered, The remains of 2 other crewmen and a technician are as yet unaccounted for, as is one of the 2 flight data recorders. This morning, Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott was at the crash site, as was the Korean ambassador.
Yes, I think we should all feel great relief in these situations that damage is not worse than it could be, but do remember there are people who died in it, and we've sent our sympathies to the relatives.
And the South Korean government has promised to cooperate fully with the crash investigation now underway at the site. Tonight, we do know something of what happened, even if it's too early to know why. Those who live in the crash area knew this jet was going to come down because no aircraft comes into this zone from the west at very low altitude. Several witnesses insist the plane was already on fire before it crashed.
I looked out the window as it came over, and there's an orange flame from the back of the plane as it headed off across the field here. And then as soon as it hit the ground, there's a large impact and explosion, a huge fireball.
Whatever did cause this crash, so far as Stansted Airport is concerned, it was not a problem on the runway itself. They say the jet made a perfectly satisfactory takeoff, had gained height and handed over to a wider area of air traffic control, indicating everything was normal as it left the runway. But that's disputed by eyewitness reports saying the plane was on fire as it took off from Stansted, though tonight the police say they found nothing on the runway to indicate a fire. Nonetheless, Korean Airlines...
Normal services resumed over the village of Great Hallingbury less than 24 hours since the disaster struck.
But it could have been very different here today. The plane came down just a few hundred yards from dozens of local houses. Many people here feel very lucky to be alive.
And nobody more so than farmer Martin Mugley.
This could have been a lot worse, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we could have been devastated. Could have been devastated. So lucky. Everybody's saying to us, you've either won the lottery or you should do the lottery this week.
Has it made you think perhaps it's now time to move?
Well, no, lightning's not supposed to strike twice, so we should be all right, shouldn't we? Yeah, I think we'll be all right. And obviously it's proved when your time's up, it's up, and it wasn't up for us.
But that looks incredibly close, doesn't it? I can't believe that you're out of this unscathed completely.
I can't believe such a large aircraft and there's such little of it left. You know, there's hardly anything left. It's just amazing.
Other villagers are a little more concerned that it might happen again.
Is the next one going to be for us, kind of thing? You never know these days. No, it's very grim, very grim.
We feel very, very lucky. I think if it had happened seconds earlier, well then these houses in this area I don't think would be here now.
It was just so frightening, and I just feel today the luckiest person on earth because I can say Happy Christmas to all my family.
The accident investigation will be a long process, but the villagers feel it's vital that everything possible is done to prevent another disaster. 𝗞𝗿𝗄𝗏, Great Hallingbury, 5 News.
It was all too clear this morning just how close the village of Great Hallingbury was to disaster. Huge chunks of wreckage from the cargo plane came down in fields yards away. The owners of this riding stables count themselves particularly lucky. The plane was so close it brought down power lines next to their buildings as it crashed.
I was looking out the window at my brother getting into his car, and I've heard this really bad noise, so I've looked up in the air and I see the plane come down, and come down on its side, and a big fireball just go up in the air, and big flames and the heat coming through the window. I felt just a big explosion.
I looked across and to see just this massive fireball. I've never seen anything like it in my life, except on the television. And my daughter was in that area at my friend's house, about to babysit for her. And all I thought of was that my daughter was actually in the fire, and I wanted to just get her back. And my son just drove quickly down the drive to go and get her back. It was just so frightening, and I just feel today the luckiest person on earth because I can say Happy Christmas to all my family.
Burning debris was scattered over an area of 1 square mile last night around the village and farms. Sections of the aircraft left embedded in fields and trees.
It was just an explosion of just light and flames, and then after the explosion it was like a big bang, and my husband came running in and said a plane's gone down in the field, and the house just went into darkness.
I mean, it wasn't going to go anywhere because of the noise of the engines and that, and within a minute, well, within seconds, it had come down.
As the emergency operation continues around them, villagers here say they're just thankful they're not at the centre of a far greater tragedy today. Helen Wright, ITN.
This stable yard is a few hundred yards from where the plane came down, just beyond those trees on the edge of that field. For the family who run a business here, last night was a terrifying experience. Today, that family, the Glynns, were trying to get back to normal. At exactly this time yesterday evening, 16-year-old Sarah Glenn was babysitting in a neighbour's cottage right beside the crash site, to her mother's horror.
I ran to the front of the house, which overlooks the site where the crash was, to see flames just thousands of feet in the air over this huge area. And in fact, this huge area looked like it covered the house where my daughter and her friend Ria were babysitting.
That must have been appalling.
I was just hysterical, absolutely hysterical.
All suddenly the room lit up and I dropped my cup and there was a loud bang and we went running out the house and there was just flames everywhere and sparks, and then all I remember is my brother flying up the drive in his car saying, Sarah, come home, you must go back to Mum.
This little community is quite used to aircraft noise, but never expected such a nightmare.
You just didn't know which house or where it would be. You knew it wasn't yourself, but then if it was a plane, I mean, obviously it was an airplane, and, you know, we didn't know whether there'd be 100, 300 people on it.
Everyone in this village is all too aware that they've had a very narrow escape. If that jumbo jet had come down just a couple of seconds later, it would have landed right here. Nicholas Owen, ITN, Great Hallingbury in Essex. What used to be a jumbo jet is now just smouldering rubble in a wood outside Stansted Airport. The inferno caused by thousands of litres of aviation fuel exploding left little for the air accident investigators. Even so, they've recovered pieces of wreckage to help them establish the cause of the crash. Human remains have also been removed. Local resident Gary Dan told me that he saw the plane seconds before it crashed.
I looked out the window as it came over, and there's an orange flame from the back of the plane as it headed off across the field here. And then as soon as it hit the ground, there's a large impact and explosion, a huge fireball.
So it was actually on fire when you saw it flying before it crashed?
Yeah, definitely. Over the top of the house, there's a lot of orange flare coming across the back of the plane as it went across the house.
How close did it come to the houses, do you think?
Feet, literally feet.
Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott visited the scene to thank firefighters and other emergency workers. For some of these men, it was just too close for comfort.
Yeah, I actually live the other end of the airport, so I know what it's like, in my own opinion. But yes, it was a lucky escape for the locals.
A huge area has been sealed off around the crater caused by the crash. Accident investigators are taking advantage of the improved weather conditions to search for debris that will be of critical importance in the inquiry to find out exactly why the plane came down. Police say one of the flight recorders has been found, but they still don't know how it happened.
We're not ruling anything in and anything out at this stage. I think it would be foolish to do any of that. We are very open-minded about this whole matter. It could be a very tragic accident, it may not be, but we're being open-minded until we've completed the investigation. It's far too early to make any speculative judgments whatsoever. There are clearly risks if you live near airports, and we're just exceedingly grateful, like I know many of the residents are. Our officers have been speaking to people on the ground last night who were very shocked, understandably so. But I think we're just all very grateful that we're dealing with what we're dealing with and not something much worse.
About an hour ago, the airport reopened after officials gave the runway the all clear. The fear had been that debris from last night might have put flights at risk. But there's still a huge backlog of delayed and cancelled flights. The airport says it's getting passengers away as quickly as possible, but it is frustrating. The one blessing is that while 4 crew members tragically died in the crash, it was carrying cargo, not people. John Draper, ITN, Stansted Airport. Early this morning, the rubble from the Korean Airlines jet was still smouldering. The tons of aviation fuel which went up had left little for the air accident investigators to sort through. But they did find one of the black box flight recorders. Even so, it'll be well after Christmas before they can come up with even a preliminary report. Also among the wreckage was human remains. It's the sheer size of the crash site that's so shocking. The plane came down over here, cut a swathe through these trees, hit this high ground, exploded in a fireball, causing a massive crater and spreading the debris over hundreds of meters. John Prescott came to thank the firefighters and other emergency services. Many of them were locals who knew only too well how close their community had come to disaster. The Korean ambassador was also here. Britain has ordered new safety checks on Korean airlines after the standards of documentation were found to be lacking. By lunchtime, Stansted had reopened after small pieces of debris had been swept off the runway. But the backlog of flights was causing frustration.
We're just not getting anything, so we don't know when we're going, what delays to expect at all.
We put our stuff in to check in, and the conveyor belt broke as well.
People have been saying, well, lives have been lost, and what's one day against that?
This evening, fewer people were waiting, but Stansted doesn't expect to get back to normal until tomorrow. At the scene of the crash, the search for clues has been suspended for the night. No theories being ruled out, including the suggestion that the plane was on fire before it took off.
We can't rule out the possibility that the engine was on fire. There was some other catastrophic failure before impact. We didn't recover anything on the runway that would confirm that.
Tomorrow the search for the second flight recorder will resume, but investigators still believe it was almost certainly a tragic accident. John Draper, ITN, Stansted. Throughout the day, air accident investigators have been sifting through the rubble, all that remains of the Korean Airlines jumbo. Somewhere in this tangled mess could lie the key to how the crash happened and possibly prevent another such disaster. Human remains have also been removed. The cargo included 2 kilograms of commercial detonator cord, but whether this played a part in bringing the 747 down, it's simply too early to say. It's the sheer size of the crash site that's so shocking. The plane came down over here, cut a swathe through these trees, hit this high ground, exploded in a fireball, causing a massive crater and spreading the debris over hundreds of meters. Earlier this morning, the rubble was still smouldering. Tons of aviation fuel had gone up. The Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, visited the scene to thank firefighters and other emergency workers. Many of them live locally and were only too aware of how much worse it could have been.
I actually live the other end of the airport, so I know what it's like, in my own opinion. But yes, it was a lucky escape for the locals in this area.
Police say one of the 2 black box flight recorders has been found, but investigators are not rushing into a judgment on how it happened. By lunchtime, the airport had been reopened after officials cleared away small pieces of wreckage from the runway. The fear had been that debris might have endangered other aircraft. But the cancelled flights and delays meant long waits for passengers. The airport said it was trying to get them all away as quickly as possible, but frustration was inevitable.
They should have stopped people coming, really, given the chaos here.
We put our stuff in to check in, and the conveyor belt broke as well.
The Korean ambassador visited Stansted. With Korean Airlines coming under criticism, there was speculation that the plane was on fire even before it took off, but police couldn't confirm that.
We can't rule out the possibility that the engine was on fire. There was some other catastrophic failure before impact. We didn't recover anything on the runway that would confirm that.
At the scene tonight, investigators were still of the opinion that it probably was an accident. John Draper, ITN, Stansted Airport.
Here on the western edge of the crash site, I'm literally treading on and over hundreds and hundreds of pieces of twisted metal aircraft fuselage like this, for it was right here that the Korean 747 first hit the ground. Over my right shoulder, a piece of the aircraft's engine itself, torn off on impact, and to my right, clearly visible from where I'm standing, a piece of the aircraft's undercarriage itself. For hundreds of yards behind me, the remainder of the aircraft's wreckage lies strewn, and in amongst it, police and fire officers are still searching for the elusive black box flight recorder and the remaining 3 bodies of the Korean crew members. When a 400-ton aircraft carrying 35 tons of aviation fuel crashes at 200 miles an hour, little more than this remains. No human being could or did survive it.
Looked up in the air and I see the plane come down and come down on its side, and big fireball just go up in the air and big flames and the heat coming through the window I felt.
The cause of the crash, notwithstanding the airline's safety record, is still unclear. No mayday call was received. Some witnesses claim the aircraft's engines were aflame, but the vital flight data recorder, which could answer so many questions, is still missing.
We can't rule out the possibility that the engine was on fire. There was some other catastrophic failure before impact. We didn't recover anything on the runway that would confirm that.
John Prescott, who saw the site today, has promised a full inquiry. He expressed relief that the death toll was not much higher, a mood shared by all present. At Stansted Airport tonight, where the passenger backlog is slowly receding, much resentment is still evident.
They're trying as hard as they can, but it's not really good enough. 6 o'clock we've been here from.
We actually just can't find any information out at all. You know, we're just not getting anything.
But for those unlucky enough to be on the wrong plane, there is no more waiting to be done. John Gilbert, Stansted, 5 News.
As the search for clues was scaled down over Christmas, the initial findings of the air accident investigators have been released. The black box voice recorder shows the crew were having problems with their instrument panel shortly after taking off. In addition, experts have reconstructed the 4 engines from the rubble and concluded that they were on full power at the time of the crash.
Nothing that's come up so far indicates that there'll be any criminal or deliberate cause of this. So we'd be looking at either pilot error or some sort of failure on the craft.
Korean Air officials who visited the site issued a statement to journalists saying that the pilot was ex-military and that such pilots sometimes took unnecessary risks. Later they said there'd been an error in the translation into English. A full report into the Stansted crash will be produced in the new year. The airport itself is back to normal.
Despite the loss of 4 lives, it could have been much worse this Christmas. Stansted can count itself lucky. John Draper, ITN, Stansted Airport.
Korean government officials visited the scene of the crash this morning. 4 Korean Air crew members were killed. The country's coming under pressure on air safety as never before. As police widened the search of the area for clues, Korean Air announced a 10-point plan to improve safety. But the airlines admitted that they employ many ex-military pilots who they concede take unnecessary risks. The pilot of the crashed plane was ex-military. At a news conference, Korean Air officials appeared uneasy when their own statements about military pilots were read back to them, but they deny they're unsafe.
The matter is currently under investigation by the Air Accident Investigation Branch of the Department of Transport, who is working with Korean Civil Aviation Board to ascertain the cause of this accident.
Stansted Airport is now back to normal, with Christmas Eve flights departing and arriving as scheduled.
Although 4 people died in the crash, it could have been so much worse here at Stansted. Korean Air say they are making improvements, trying to match Western standards, but until they achieve that, questions will remain about the airline. John Draper, ITN, Stansted Airport.
It may be Christmas Eve, but the police operation at the crash site has continued. The area of the search for clues widened. Even small fragments could provide valuable information as to why the 747 crashed, killing 4 crew members. A preliminary report's been completed and is now with the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott. Korean government officials visited the scene. They've brought their own team of air accident investigators. Also here are executives from Korean Air. At a news conference, they expressed their sorrow about the crash.
It is far too early to speculate on the cause. However, we are working as quickly as we can, and we are providing every assistance to the investigation team. Thank you.
But there was embarrassment over a Korean Air written statement conceding that many of its pilots were ex-military and that military pilots took unnecessary risks. After some discussion, they said there'd been a problem in the translation. The pilot of the 747 that crashed this week was ex-military. The searching will continue for several weeks, but already the authorities are ruling out foul play.
Well, nothing that's come up so far indicates that there'll be any criminal or deliberate cause of this. So we'd be looking at either pilot error or some sort of failure on the craft.
The last of the Christmas Eve flights are getting away. Now the airport's returned to normal. It's been a traumatic few days here, and despite the loss of 4 lives, it could have been much worse this Christmas. Stansted can count itself lucky. John Draper, ITN, Stansted Airport.
It advertises flights on the internet, and though the airline's popular with UK travellers, pilots are worried about staffing. The airline is upgrading training, but pilots say one factor in its safety record might be a conflict between ex-military pilots working alongside civilian trained ones.
If they're not trained to work together properly, and it's not superintended from the top, the training, then these are the sort of things which may occur.
Over the last couple of years, Korean has now really completely lost 4 aircraft. It's hard to write that off as a statistical blip anymore. There's no question at all that they have a problem. Korean has a pretty poor safety record. It's really almost unique among the major carriers of the world in having such a bad statistical record. In general, it's not always the case that bad statistics equals a bad safety record. People can just be unlucky for a period of time and then go for decades without having an accident. But over the last couple of years, Korean has now really completely lost 4 aircraft. It's hard to write that off as a statistical blip anymore. There's no question at all that they have a problem.
Recognising that, a 28-strong technical team from Korean Airlines is due at Stansted tonight to help with the investigation.
다음 소식입니다. 대한항공 화물기가 또 추락했습니다. 오늘 새벽 영국 런던 근교에서 대한항공 소속 보잉 747 화물 수송기가 이륙 직후 추락해서 승무원 등 4명이 숨졌습니다. 현장에 나가 있는 유근찬 특파원을 연결합니다. 유 특파원.
네, 유근찬입니다.
네, 먼저 오늘 사고가 어떻게 일어났습니까?
네, 아직 정확한 사고 원인은 밝혀지지 않고 있습니다만 일단 사고는 우리 시각으로 오늘 새벽 3시 40분께 일어난 것으로 이렇게 굳어지고 있습니다. 모두 64톤의 화물을 싣고 이탈리아 밀라노로 가기 위해서 활주로를 이륙한 이 화물기는 이륙한 지 2분도 채 안 돼서 공항 근처 구릉지에 충돌하면서 그 불기둥이 200m나 하늘로 치솟았고 잔해가 마치 비 오듯 하늘에서 쏟아졌다고 목격자들이 증언하고 있습니다. 공중 폭발이냐 아니면은 추락 후의 폭발이냐 여부는 아직 밝혀지지 않고 있습니다. 폭발 순간 화염의 온도가 얼마나 뜨거웠던지 근처 주택 안에 있던 사람들까지도 느낄 수 있을 정도였다는 것입니다. 화물기에 탑승했던 기장 박덕규 씨와 부기장 윤기식 씨 등 승무원 3명과 또 정비사 1명 등 4명이 오늘 사고로 전원 사망했습니다. 현장 조사팀은 현장에서 시체 1구와 또 다른 3명분의 시신을 수습했다고 오늘 밝혔습니다.
네, 지금 현장 조사와 사후 수습은 어떻게 이루어지고 있습니까?
네, 지금 현장에서는 경찰과 영국 민간 항공조사국 조사단 그리고 미국 보잉사 조사팀까지 합류해서 정밀 조사 활동을 펴고 있습니다. 조사팀이 현재 규명하려는 의문은 공중폭발이냐의 여부이고 만일 공중폭발이라면 그 이유가 무엇인가에 모아지고 있습니다. 경찰 대변인은 어젯밤 기자회견을 통해서 조사팀은 현재 화물에 의심을 집중시키고 있다면서 이렇게 말했습니다.
There is a suggestion that this may be possibly paint or possibly flammable cargo. So clearly.
다른 한편으로 조사팀은 현장에서 수거한 음성 녹음 기록 정치를 정밀 분석하고 있습니다. 아직 즉각적으로 단서가 될 만한 것은 발견되지 않았지만 그러나 조종사와 관제탑과의 교신 내용을 정밀 분석하면 어느 정도 사고 원인의 단서를 찾을 수 있을 것으로 기대하고 있습니다. 대한항공은 스탠스테드 공항 근처의 힐튼 호텔에 오늘 사고 대책본부를 설치하고 본격적인 사고 수습에 나서고 있습니다. 런던에서
네, 사고 현장에는 우리 측 조사단도 급파됐습니다. 이번 사고의 원인이 무엇인지 또 왜 대한항공계 유독 사고가 많은지 등을 조순용 사회 1부장과 함께 알아보겠습니다. 네, 먼저 사고 원인과 관련해서 적재 화물에 문제가 있었다는 현지 보도가 있습니다. 어떤 화물이 실려 있었습니까?
네, 특수 화물을 말합니다. 전체 64톤에 탑재되어 있던 화물 가운데 200kg 정도가 페인트와 벤젠 등 화공약품 3가지가 실려 있었다는 것입니다. 그러나 실제 무게는 40kg 정도에 불과하고 나머지 160kg은 포장 무게라는 것입니다. 대한항공 측은 특수 화물의 엄격한 포장 규격에 맞게 탑재시켰기 때문에 문제가 될 수 없다 이렇게 말하고 있습니다.
네, 사고기가 낡았다던데요. 얼마나 된 비행기입니까?
19년 9개월 됐습니다. 네. 미국 보잉사가 지난 80년 3월 화물 전용기로 만든 것으로서 그해 6월 대한항공이 이를 도입했습니다. 8만 3천 시간의 비행에 15,400회의 착륙 기록을 갖고 있습니다. 지금까지 모두 382차례 정기 점검과 27차례의 정밀 점검을 받았습니다. 가장 최근의 점검 날짜는 지난 3일이었습니다. 물론 이상이 없었기 때문에 계속 운항한 것입니다.
그 밖에 추정되는 사고의 원인은 없습니까?
일단 조종사의 실수를 추정해 볼 수 있겠습니다. 그러나 대한항공 측은 탑승 승무원들이 비행 전 최소한 이틀 이상 충분한 휴식을 취했기 때문에 전혀 문제가 없을 것이다 이렇게 밝히고 있습니다. 날씨도 생각해 볼 수 있습니다만은 사고 당시 흐린 날씨에 16노트의 남풍이 불고 있었긴 하지만은 이륙에 전혀 문제가 없었습니다. 그 이해로 사고 1시간 전에 아시아나 비행기 화물기가 그 공항을 이륙한 것이 또 드러났습니다.
네, 도대체 대한항공기 사고 이번이 도대체 몇 번째입니까?
올 들어만도 3번째입니다. 지난 3월 포항공항 사고와 4월 상하이 화물기 추락 사고에 이어서 3번째입니다. 지난 10년간 우리나라 항공기 사고는 모두 11건이 일어났습니다만은 이 가운데 9건이 대한항공기에서 일어났습니다. 그중에 4대의 대한항공기는 추락했습니다. 세계적으로 이렇게 사고를 많이 내고 있는 항공사는 유례를 찾아보기 힘듭니다.
그 이유가 뭐라고 보십니까?
요약하면 안전의식 부재다 이렇게 말씀드릴 수 있겠습니다. 안전을 최우선해야 할 항공사가 안전보다는 성장과 이익에 급급했기 때문이라는 분석이 지배적입니다. 여기엔 과거 정부에서 국적항공사라며 대한항공을 비정상적으로 비호해온 것도 그 배경을 이루고 있습니다. 조세 포탈 혐의로 창업주 조중훈 명예회장 등 3부자가 검찰에 고발됐고 대한항공 회장인 장남 양호 씨가 현재 구속돼 있는 것도 이를 반증하고 있습니다. 전문 경영이 아니라 족벌 경영 체제, 실력과 경험보다는 연줄에 의해서 이루어지는 회사가 어떻게 가는가, 그 자연스러운 귀결이라는 것입니다. 여기에다가 조종사들은 영어에 서툴고 조종관을 잡는 것이 군 복무 중이기 때문에 민간기 조종에는 적합지 않고 또 노련한 정비사들이 회사를 떠났다 이런 것도 원인으로 지적되고 있습니다.
네, 그동안 대한항공에 대해서 정부의 제재가 여러 차례 있었는데 이번에는 어떻습니까?
오늘 당장 건설교통부는 6개월간 사고 원인과 관련 없이 신규 국제노선 배분을 제한하는 조치를 내렸습니다. 그러나 대한항공은 이미 2년 전 괌 사고로 인해서 내년 11월까지 신규 노선 배분의 제한을 받고 있는 상태이기 때문에 거기에 6개월이 더 추가되게 되는 것입니다. 나라의 국제적 위신을 추락시키고 있는 대한항공은 창업 이래 이렇게 해서 최대 위기를 지금 맞고 있습니다.
네, 조순영 부장 수고하셨습니다.
대한항공 화물기 추락사고 조사 소식입니다. 영국 항공조사국은 추락 원인을 계기 장치를 중심으로 한 기체 결함으로 추정하고 있습니다. 런던에서 김태선 기자가 보도합니다.
당시 사고기는 이륙 직후 런던 관제탑과 주파수 변경을 위한 마지막 교신을 가진 뒤 2,500피트 지점에서 갑작스런 계기판 고장으로 통제 불능 상태에 빠진 것으로 드러났습니다. 영국 항공사고조사국이 사고 현장에서 수거한 음성 기록 장치를 분석한 결과입니다. 영국 항공사고조사국은 또 사고기의 엔진 4개를 찾아내 정밀 분석한 결과 최고 출력 상태에서 모두 정상적으로 작동하고 있었다고 밝혔습니다. 결국 이번 사고의 원인은 계기 장치 등 기체 결함일 가능성이 매우 높아졌습니다. 사고 원인을 밝히는 데 결정적인 단서가 될 음성 기록 장치 분석 결과가 남에 따라 오늘 성탄절임에도 불구하고 한국과 영국, 미국 등 합동 사고조사단은 이곳 사고 현장에서 나머지 수색 작업에 박차를 가하고 있습니다.
사고 조사를 위해서는 비행 기록 장치를 찾는 게 가장 중요한 일이기 때문에 오늘도 중점적으로 비행 기록 장치를 찾을 예정입니다.
우리 시각으로 오늘 새벽 런던에 도착한 사고기 승무원 유족들은 잠시 뒤에 사고 현장과 일부 시신이 안치된 장소를 찾을 예정입니다. 런던 스탠스테드 공항에서 KBS 뉴스 김태선입니다.
런던 근교에서 추락한 대한항공 화물기는 계기나 기체 이상으로 인해서 추락했을 가능성이 높아지고 있습니다. 그러나 아직 비행 기록 장치는 찾지 못했습니다. 런던 스탠스테드에서 김태선 기자가 취재했습니다.
영국 항공사고조사기구는 대한항공 화물기가 테러에 의해 추락한 것은 아니라는 잠정 결론을 내렸습니다. 이것은 음성 기록 장치의 조사 결과 이륙 직후의 계기 이상이나 기체 이상이 가장 유력한 사고 원인이라는 판단에 따른 것입니다. 조사단은 오늘 블랙박스가 떨어진 것으로 추정되는 이곳 사고 현장 부근의 호수에 잠수부를 투입해 수색 작업을 계속했습니다. 그러나 사고 원인 규명에 결정적인 열쇠가 될 비행 기록 장치가 들어있는 블랙박스는 아직까지 발견되지 않고 있습니다.
비행자료 기록 장치에 장착돼 있는 신호 발생기만 떨어져 있는 상태로 발견이 됐습니다.
블랙박스의 위치를 알려주는 수중 신호 발생 장치는 발견됐지만 추락 당시의 충격으로 블랙박스 본체는 다른 곳으로 분리된 것으로 보입니다. 이에 따라 비행 기록 장치의 발견과 이를 통한 사고 원인 규명에 많은 시간이 소요될 것으로 보입니다. 한편 사고 현장을 찾은 승무원들의 유족들은 참혹한 현장을 보고 오열을 터뜨렸습니다. 유족들은 사고기 잔해 앞에서 국화와 술을 놓고 고인들의 명복을 빌었습니다. 런던 스탠스테드 공항에서 KBS 뉴스 김태선입니다.